picture a smell that doesn't exist. Picture the particular odour of a life lived incorrectly. Not unwashed skin, not bad teeth, not the honest stench of physical labour. Something far more dangerous than any of that. The smell of a woman who has failed, in the eyes of an entire civilization, to accomplish the single most important thing a woman was supposed to accomplish. The smell of a woman who has reached 30 or 35 or 40 and still sleeps alone, still wakes alone, still walks through the world without a man's name attached to hers like a leash. This is Victorian England, and in Victorian England that smell has a name. They call it the old maid smell, and tonight you are her. Not because you failed, not because you're broken or ugly or wrong, but because the world has decided with absolute confidence and absolutely no evidence that a woman without a husband is a woman who has gone off, like milk left too long on a summer shelf, like a flower that peaked 3 seasons ago and is now just taking up space in the vase. So tonight we're going back. Not as tourists looking at the pretty parts of the Victorian era, the silk gowns, the gaslit parlours, the earnest young men proposing in garden gazebos. We're living it. One day, one woman, everything she would have seen, smelled, touched, survived, and quietly endured without anyone noticing the effort it cost her. I make these history stories about the uncomfortable parts that nobody puts in the Heritage Museum brochures. And if you're listening to this while trying to fall asleep, I genuinely cannot tell if you find the Victorian social annihilation of unmarried women relaxing, or if you're just the kind of person who finds institutional cruelty soothing. Either way, I respect you. Get comfortable. Let's go. Her name is Eleanor Marsh. She is 34 years old. She is not old. She is not desperate. She's not, in any measurable physical sense, emitting a particularly problematic odour. But this is 1882, and none of that matters, because the story the world has already decided to tell about her is louder than any truth she could offer in its place. She lives in rooms on Gower Street in Bloomsbury, London. 2 rooms, a bedroom and what the landlady, Mrs. Penworth, generously calls a sitting room, though it is barely large enough to contain one upholstered chair, a small writing desk, and the philosophical weight of Eleanor's particular life. She pays 4 shillings and 6pence a week for these rooms, which is a not inconsiderable portion of the 14 shillings she earns from the Haverstock family in Fitzrovia, where she works as a governess to 2 girls aged 8 and 11, who are cleverer than anyone in that house will ever acknowledge. It is a Tuesday morning in March. Your eyes open before the light does. The room is dark, really dark, the kind of dark that comes from a north-facing window and a sky full of coal smoke, and the particular muffled greyness of London deciding whether or not it's going to rain. You can hear the sounds of the street below, already busy, the clatter of a milk cart on the cobbles, the rattle of iron wheels, a man shouting something at someone about something that doesn't concern you. And then the smell. It hits you, the way smells always do when you've been asleep. In layers, in waves, building from the baseline upward. The first smell is lavender, dry and a little bitter, with the particular flatness of something that has been performing its function for so long, it's almost exhausted. It comes from the sachets you keep in the drawer beneath your underclothes, small cloth bags filled with dried flowers that you refresh every summer, because lavender keeps moths from eating your wool, and because lavender is also, though you do not think about this consciously, a smell that marks you as a woman who lives carefully and alone. Lavender is the smell of preservation, the smell of things being kept in good condition, against a future use that keeps getting deferred. The second smell is camphor. Faint, medicinal, with that sharp mineral edge that gets into the back of your throat. It comes from the small cedar-lined box where you store your better things. The grey wool dress you wear on Sundays, the cream blouse with the pin tucks down the front, the pair of kid gloves that were your mother's and that you have now owned for 11 years without ever quite having an occasion worthy of them. Camphor keeps things. That's the whole point of camphor. It preserves and protects and holds things in suspension, waiting. You have never made this connection consciously. You make it now, lying in the dark, not quite willing to get up yet. The third smell is coal ash, cold and metallic and slightly sulphurous, coming from the small fireplace in the corner where last night's fire died sometime around 11, when you put down your book and told yourself it was time to sleep. The fire is out. The room is cold. The temperature has that particular bite of early March in a house without central heating. Not the brutal cold of January, but the sneaking, persistent cold of a season that has decided not to leave yet. The cold that gets into cotton sheets and sits there all night, slowly draining the warmth from your body. You're wearing 2 nightgowns. This is not eccentricity, this is practicality. You cannot afford to keep the fire burning through the night. Coal costs money, and money is a resource you've been carefully managing for 11 years with the attention to detail of someone who knows exactly what happens when it runs out. The fourth smell, underneath all of it, is you. The particular smell of a human body after 7 hours of sleep. Slightly stale, slightly warm. The smell of skin and hair, and the particular chemistry of a body that has been doing its ordinary biological work all night without anyone watching. You're 34 years old and you're alive and your body smells like a body. This is, in the parlance of 1882, a problem. Not because bodies smelling like bodies is unusual. Every body smells like a body. The men who ride in their carriages past your window smell like bodies. The ladies who take the air in the park smell like bodies underneath their attar of roses and French violet water. Mrs. Penworth downstairs smells like a body that has been liberally doused in something floral to compensate. But your body is an unmarried woman's body, and an unmarried woman's body, in the Victorian taxonomy of odour and social meaning, is supposed to smell of specific things in specific quantities as a signal that she's at least trying, that she understands the contract, that she has not given up. The contract is this: you are expected to smell of cleanliness, of flowers, of gentle domestic industry, of the careful management of a body that is waiting to be claimed and must therefore be kept in presentable condition. You're expected to not smell of sweat or real physical exertion or the animal fact of being a mammal or anything that might suggest you have a body rather than a decorative surface. You're expected to smell of effort and hope and mild desperation, and to perform this smell with sufficient subtlety that no one can quite point to it and say that's what it is. The old maid smell is what happens when the effort slips, when hope curdles, when the lavender goes flat and the violet water runs out and the careful daily maintenance of a body that must be presentable on 14 shillings a week starts to show its seams. You know this because you have smelled it on other women, on Miss Hartwell at the church social last autumn. Not unwashed, nothing so specific or correctable as that, but something underneath, something that spoke of rooms aired insufficiently and a body tended without joy. On Mrs. Carver, the vicar's housekeeper, who's been 49 since you first met her 8 years ago, and will probably be 49 until she dies. Not a bad smell, just a flattened one. a smell from which all urgency has been removed. You think about this for approximately 4 seconds. Then you get up. The floor is cold. Of course the floor is cold. The floor is always cold in March on Gower Street on a Tuesday morning before 6 o'clock. The boards are bare. You have a small rug beside the bed, a remnant of a larger rug that used to belong to your mother, and you step onto that first, letting the wool fibre come between your feet and the cold wood, and then you find your slippers, which are at the foot of the bed where you leave them every night, because if they were anywhere else in this small room, you would not be able to locate them in the dark without falling over the chair. You cross to the washstand. The water in the pitcher has been sitting since last night. It is cold and slightly stale, and has developed a faint mineral taste that you will not be drinking, but will notice when it touches your face. You pour it into the basin, not all of it, because you cannot refill the pitcher easily. Mrs. Penworth's girl brings hot water up once a day at 7, and until then you manage with what you have, and you reach for the soap. The soap is homemade. Not by you. You buy it from a chemist's on Tottenham Court Road, a plain rectangular block that smells of carbolic and very little else. It costs 2pence. You make 1 block last 3 weeks. This requires the kind of careful soap rationing that has become second nature, the same way all small economies have become second nature. The single candle burned to its stub before it's replaced. The stockings mended 4 times before they're retired. The tea leaves used twice. The carbolic soap. You've been thinking about switching to something nicer. Something with a more definite scent. Violet soap, rose soap, any of the toilet soaps they advertise in the women's magazines, with their promises of freshness and delicacy, and the implication that the right soap will make you smell like someone whose life is working out. But violet soap costs 4 times as much as carbolic. And carbolic does what soap is supposed to do, which is clean. And Eleanor Marsh has decided some years ago that she will spend her money on things that perform their actual function, rather than on things that perform a social one. She is not always stuck to this. There is a bottle on the washstand. Small, brown glass with a cork stopper. Lavender water, which you make yourself. You buy the lavender oil from the apothecary and dilute it in a mixture of water and a small amount of spirits, decanting it into this bottle which used to contain something entirely different, and whose label you have soaked off and replaced with your own, written in your small, careful hand. Lavender water is not perfume. You are clear on this distinction. Perfume is for evening, for occasion, for women who have evenings and occasions. Lavender water is a daily necessity. The thing you apply after washing to neutralise the morning smell of a body that has spent the night doing what bodies do, and to replace it with something that says, I have attended to this, I have been diligent, I am clean. You splash your face. The cold hits you like a small controlled shock, up from the chin, across the cheeks, along the nose. Your eyes water slightly. You breathe through it. This is not suffering. This is just mourning. Your hands are dry. They've been dry since November. The skin on your knuckles cracking in the cold, and the indoor heat of the schoolroom, and the chalk dust you handle every day. You have a small pot of glycerin on the washstand for this. Another apothecary purchase, another precisely calibrated economy, and you work it into the backs of your hands before you do anything else, pushing it into the cracks with your thumbs, because cracked hands that bleed are unhygienic, and unhygienic is a category you cannot afford to belong to, not when unhygienic and unmarried are sitting so close together in the Victorian taxonomy of female failure. You cross to the chest of drawers. 4 drawers. You know exactly what is in each one. Top drawer, left, stockings, rolled in pairs, sorted by colour, black for every day, grey for Sundays, one pair of cream that you bought 3 years ago and have worn perhaps 4 times, top drawer, right, undergarments, white cotton, high-necked, long-sleeved, entirely without adornment. Some women put lace on their chemises, some women put tucks and embroidery and small silk ribbons threaded through eyelet holes. This is your one genuine luxury. Not the lace itself, but a cotton chemise that has a single border of broderie anglaise at the neck, which you can feel against your skin all day, which costs you nothing once it's purchased, and which is seen by no one except yourself. Second drawer, blouses folded. Third drawer, the heavier things, a woolen petticoat, a spare skirt. Bottom drawer, odds and ends that don't fit anywhere else. The cedar box, the correspondence you haven't answered yet, the book you're currently reading. You dress in the cold with the efficiency of long practice. Chemise first, then the stays. Here is where it gets difficult. The corset is a practical matter and also an endurance sport. The stays you wear are not the theatrical waist-cinching instruments of fashion illustration. You're a governess, not a debutante, and you don't have a lady's maid, and fashion illustration has never had to account for the reality of a woman dressing herself at 6 in the morning in a cold room on 14 shillings a week. Your stays are moderately boned, moderately laced, designed to provide the correct silhouette for a respectable working woman without requiring another person to achieve. You can do them yourself. It took you the better part of 6 months to learn this with any efficiency, and you've been doing it alone for 11 years. You lace up from the bottom, sitting on the edge of the bed, reaching behind you with the ease of practice. The boning settles across your ribs, your breath adjusts. Women who have never worn stays wonder how women breathe in them. Women who wear stays every day know you breathe differently, shallower, higher from the upper chest rather than the belly. After 11 years, this is just how breathing feels. You would feel naked without it. Not because you have internalized the aesthetic, though perhaps you have in ways you don't examine, but because the stays are structural. They tell your body how to present itself to the day. They are the container that makes you governessable, respectable, employable. They are the architecture of the correct impression. Black skirt, navy blue blouse with the small white collar that you turned last month and will turn again in 3 months when this side starts to show wear. The collar itself is detachable. You have 4 of them, rotating through the week, 2 being worn and 2 being washed and dried on the rack above the cold fireplace. A fresh collar is not a small thing. A fresh collar is a signal. I am someone who maintains standards. I am someone who notices these things. I have not let go. The question of hair. Your hair is brown, and there is a great deal of it, which is one of the few things the Victorian era straightforwardly considers an asset, as long as it is properly managed. Properly managed means pinned up, contained, disciplined into shapes that read as respectable, without reading as fashionable, because fashionable hair requires either a lady's maid or a very large amount of time and a degree of vanity that a governess is not supposed to display. Fashionable hair would be a social error. It would suggest you thought you were something you're not. You brush it. 100 strokes is the common instruction, and you have done this since you were 14 when your mother told you, with the seriousness she brought to most things, that beautiful hair was the least expensive adornment a woman could maintain, and that 100 strokes before bed would keep it healthy. You do 75 most mornings, because 100 takes too long. The brush is wooden-handled with natural bristles slightly worn, the bristles splaying slightly outward on one side. You should replace it. You keep not replacing it. Pins. You have a lot of pins. Hairpins are inexpensive and you own enough of them to outfit a small regiment. You wind and tuck and pin with the automatic competence of someone who has performed this exact sequence of movements approximately 4,000 times. The result is neat, smooth, low on the neck, not glamorous, not trying too hard. Correct. You look in the small mirror on the washstand. You look back. 34. Brown eyes that are, if you're being honest with yourself, still rather good eyes. A face that is not conventionally pretty in the rosy soft way that Victorian England prefers its women. Your face is long and angular, with cheekbones too prominent and a jaw too defined. But a face that looks, as your friend Margaret once told you rather backhanded complimentarily, like it belongs to someone who knows things. You have taken this to be approximately true. You do not, in any detectable physical sense, smell of failure. You smell of carbolic soap and lavender water and the particular mineral cold of a March morning. You smell like a woman who has washed her face and dressed herself with care. You smell, in other words, exactly the way you have trained yourself to smell, through daily effort, through the expenditure of small economies, through the application of lavender water applied with 2 fingertips to the inside of each wrist and the base of the neck, just there, where the collar doesn't quite cover. This is the performance. The daily performance that costs nothing and costs everything. You go downstairs. Mrs. Penworth's house has 3 floors and 7 lodgers, and at 6:20 in the morning on a Tuesday, the house has a particular sound. The muffled noises of 6 other people, also performing their own morning rituals behind closed doors, the thump of footsteps on the landing above, the distant clatter from the kitchen where Mrs. Penworth's girl Sarah is beginning breakfast. The staircase smells of the whole house, coal, cooking fat, the damp that comes in from the street, and something underneath all of it that is just the smell of a house full of people living economically in close proximity. You do not have breakfast with the other lodgers. This is a choice you made when you first took these rooms, and you have never revisited it. And the reason is simple. The other lodgers include Mr. Calloway, a solicitor's clerk in his mid-20s, who is pleasant and harmless, and who has a way of looking at you over his teacup that is either sympathy or pity or something in between, that you cannot quite bring yourself to anatomize. Mr. and Mrs. Jarvis, a married couple, who take the large front room on the first floor and whose presence at breakfast involves the kind of domestic easiness that you find, on certain mornings, rather too much to witness before 8 o'clock. And 2 other women, Miss Ashford and Miss Crouch, who are both in their 40s, who have lived in this house for 9 and 12 years respectively, and whose company you find at once completely comfortable and faintly terrifying, because they are exactly what the world intends you to become. Miss Ashford is a milliner's assistant. She smells of straw and the particular dusty dry smell of hat-making materials, feathers, ribbons, the papery smell of blocked hat brims. She is 51. She wears very clean white collars and has beautiful hands. She talks about her sister's children in Somerset, with the detailed devotion of someone whose life has contracted to fit whatever it was given, and who's made a genuine peace with the shape of things. Miss Crouch teaches piano lessons from her room. She smells of rosin and the particular staleness that accumulates in a room where windows are rarely opened because opened windows disturb the student's concentration. She is 47. She has not made peace with the shape of things. This is visible in the set of her shoulders and the way she eats breakfast quickly and without looking at anyone, as if consuming food is something shameful that must be accomplished rapidly before anyone notices. You eat breakfast alone in your sitting room. Sarah brings up a tray, included in your rent, with tea and 2 slices of bread and butter, and on Tuesdays and Fridays, a small pot of marmalade. The tea is strong and slightly stewed, and exactly what you need. The bread is yesterday's, slightly stale, but the butter is fresh. You eat standing by the window, looking down at Gower Street, watching the morning arrange itself. The carts, the workers, the businessmen beginning their commute on foot, the women going to market with their baskets on their arms. You're not thinking about the smell. You're almost never consciously thinking about the smell, but it is there, underneath everything, the low steady pressure of a social fact. You are 34 and unmarried in 1882, and this means that a story is already being told about you by every person you encounter, and the story is that something is wrong with you, and that wrongness has leaked out into your physical presentation in ways that other people can detect, if only they were paying attention. They're always paying attention. You finish your tea, you pin your collar more firmly at the throat, you put on your coat, grey wool, 3 years old, well brushed, with new buttons you sewed on yourself last autumn, when the old ones began to look shabby. You put on your hat, which is small and dark and which sits on your head at the angle Mrs. Penworth's hall mirror has taught you is most effective. You pick up your bag, a brown leather bag, scuffed at the corners, large enough for the lesson books and the small amount of sewing you carry to do during the children's independent study time, and you go out. The street hits you all at once. London in March smells nothing like your rooms. London in March smells like horse dung and coal smoke, and the particular wet mineral smell of cobblestones after rain, and the bakery 3 doors down which has been at it since 4 in the morning, and is now producing clouds of warm bread smell that drift across the pavement in a way that is almost cruel, given that you've already eaten your breakfast and cannot justify spending a penny on a roll. Add to this the smell of the man who passes you with a cart full of some kind of vegetable matter in a state of high decomposition, and the smell of the public house on the corner, whose door is already open, and from which a wave of old beer and tobacco emerges with startling confidence, and the general ambient smell of several 100,000 people living and working in impractical proximity. You navigate it the way you navigate all of it, efficiently, without much thought, with the automatic competence of someone who has been doing this walk 5 days a week for 2 years. Gower Street to Tottenham Court Road, south on Tottenham Court Road to Oxford Street, west on Oxford Street to Regent Street, north on Regent Street to Cavendish Square. The Haverstock House is on Devonshire Place, 10 minutes walk from Cavendish Square if the streets aren't too congested, 12 if there's a cart stuck in the bottleneck at Langham Place. This morning there is a coal delivery blocking half the road near the junction with Margaret Street, and 2 men are having an argument about it with the energy of people who have been having this exact argument for 20 minutes and intend to continue for another 30. You step into the road, avoid a pile of something you don't examine too closely, regain the pavement and keep walking. A woman passes you going the other direction. She's perhaps 40, well dressed in that particular way of upper-middle-class women who have money but not fashion consciousness, with a fur tippet around her shoulders and a basket on her arm. She looks at you. Not at you exactly, at the general category of you. The 34-year-old woman walking alone at this hour with a bag of lesson books. The woman who reads as governess or school teacher or something in that spectrum of respectable female employment. The look lasts approximately a second and a half and contains within it, like a very small and very precisely targeted missile, an entire assessment: the slightly shabby coat, the plain hat, the absence of any male companion, the purposeful working woman stride. The assessment concludes with something that might be sympathy or recognition, or the particular solidarity of women who have both been on the receiving end of that look themselves. She is past you before you can determine which it is. This is the thing about being an unmarried working woman in 1882. People look at you differently depending on what story they've already decided to tell. Some of them see a tragedy: the poor spinster, the failed woman, the one left behind. Some of them see something more complicated, something they can't quite categorize, which makes them uneasy in a way they'll convert to judgment, because unease without an outlet is uncomfortable. Some of them, mostly women, see something that makes them look away quickly, as if your existence is a mirror they don't want to look into directly. And some of them just see a woman walking to work, which is all you are, and let you get on with it. You prefer those ones, but there aren't as many of them as you'd like. The Haverstock House on Devonshire Place is a 4-storey terraced house that announces through its freshly painted door and its polished brass and its spotless front steps that the people who live here have money and believe in the visible expression of money as a form of communication. The front steps are cleaned every morning by the under-housemaid, a girl of about 15 named Annie, who is always out there when you arrive at 5 to 8, on her knees with a stone, and who always looks up at you with an expression somewhere between resentment and relief. Resentment that her life involves scrubbing steps at 5 to 8 in the morning. Relief that you're not Mrs. Haverstock coming to inspect her work. You do not go in by the front door. You go in by the side entrance, through the gate, down the area steps. This is the correct procedure for a governess. Not quite a servant. You eat dinner with the family, or at least with the children on most days. You're called Miss Marsh rather than by your Christian name. You're invited to sit in the drawing room on occasional evenings, but not quite a member of the household either. Not quite family, despite the intimacy of your work. The hours spent in direct contact with the children's minds and fears and small embarrassments. The side entrance communicates the position precisely. Respected, but situated. Welcome, but aware of what kind of welcome this is. The kitchen is warm. This is the first warmth you've encountered since leaving your room, and it hits you in the face as you push open the service door. A wave of coal-fired heat and cooking smells. Something with onions and bread just pulled from the oven, and coffee which Mrs. Haverstock favours over tea, and which fills the whole lower ground floor with its dark, complicated smell. Cook. Mrs. Beale, though everyone calls her Cook, which Cook has long since stopped minding, looks up from the range. She's a large woman in her 50s with forearms reddened from the constant heat, and she treats you with the easy friendliness of someone who has decided you are not a threat to the domestic hierarchy, and therefore can be related to normally. Miss Marsh. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. Morning, Mrs. Beale. Cold out? Getting there. She nods and goes back to the range. The kitchen has a smell of its own. Beef dripping, bread, the particular salty sweetness of something boiling, the background mineral smell of the coal fire, and underneath all of that, the damp stone smell of the basement. It is, in every technical sense, a better smell than your room's. It is the smell of activity, of purpose, of a house that is producing things. You stand in it for a moment longer than you strictly need to. Then you go up. The schoolroom is on the third floor, which is both logical, removed from the social rooms where the governess and her charges making noise would be an inconvenience, and slightly punishing, because 3 flights of stairs 5 times a day amounts to considerable physical effort, and your coat is too warm for it, and by the time you reach the 3rd floor landing you're faintly breathless, and your collar is beginning to feel close. You open the schoolroom door. The room smells of chalk. That is the permanent base note of this room, chalk dust. The particular dry mineral smell of it that settles into the wood of the desk, and the fibres of the curtains and the pages of the books, and eventually your clothes and your hands and the back of your throat. Underneath the chalk, old paper, the slightly musty smell of books kept in a room that is heated inconsistently, and the faint sweetness of the beeswax that someone, Annie probably, or the housemaid, has applied to the window frames to keep them from sticking. You hang your coat on the hook behind the door. You set your bag on your desk. You look at the room. 2 small desks facing yours. 2 chairs with cushions that do not quite fit the seats. A bookshelf along one wall, containing the approved texts, grammar, arithmetic, history, geography, French, with a small section of more doubtful works, novels that Mrs. Haverstock has approved reluctantly, a book of poetry that you yourself brought and which has not been commented on, a globe that spins with a slight resistance, a blackboard, and a piece of chalk that is down to perhaps 3 inches, which will not be sufficient for today's geography lesson, but might be coaxed through arithmetic if you write small. A window that looks over the back garden, where a single tree is beginning, very tentatively, to think about budding. You pick up yesterday's lesson books and open them. Clara's arithmetic, competent, hasty. Clara is 8, and she thinks quickly and writes messily, and will almost certainly in 20 years be doing precisely whatever it is she actually wants to do, with or without the world's cooperation. Her handwriting looks like something that has been knocked over. Her sums are correct. Edith's handwriting exercise exquisite. Perfectly formed letters, perfectly consistent spacing, each word sitting exactly on the line. Edith is 11, and Edith has understood with the particular precision of an 11-year-old who has been watching how the world works, that handwriting is the first visible signal of character, and character is something she intends to manage very carefully. Her penmanship is not pretty. It is armoured. You can see it in the pressure of the nib, the deliberate control. Edith is going to be an interesting person to know when she grows up, assuming she's allowed to. You open the markings ledger and write the date. Tuesday, 14th March, 1882. The door bangs. Both girls arrive with the energy of a small domestic avalanche. Clara first, in a rush, her hair already escaping from its plaits, though it's been up for perhaps 90 minutes. Edith behind her, at a measured walk, which is Edith performing composure for your benefit. "Miss Marsh," says Edith. "Good morning." "Miss Marsh," says Clara, dropping her sewing bag on the floor and then picking it up again with the guilty sideways look of someone who knows they've been caught doing something that will be commented on. "Good morning, Clara. Good morning, Edith." You look at Clara's hair. "We'll do the plait again at 11. "It always comes out," Clara says, slightly plaintive. "Yes," you agree. "We'll do it again at 11. Clara sits down. She has the cheerful philosophical acceptance of a child who has learned that certain battles have predetermined outcomes, and that her role is to present the information and then accept the verdict. You like this about her. You like both of them, which is not guaranteed. You have worked in households before where you found the children tolerable at best and spiritually exhausting at worst. And the work of teaching children you don't much like is a particular kind of draining that you try not to dwell on, but these two are genuinely good company. Can we do the globe first? Clara asks. We're starting with arithmetic. Clara makes a sound that is not quite a groan, but is in the same postal district as a groan. Edith opens her book to the correct page without being asked. You pick up the chalk, 3 inches. You hold it like something precious. Right, you say. Long division, page 43. The morning begins. This is the part of your life that most closely resembles what a life is supposed to look like, which is perhaps why you find it the most bearable. In the schoolroom, with the chalk dust and the globe and the books and 2 children who are, at various moments, infuriating and delightful and genuinely surprising, the question of what you smell like and whether you are correctly positioned within the marriage market of 1882 London is not a question that presents itself. You're simply a teacher. You know things and you're communicating them. The children are learning, or not learning, or pretending to learn while actually thinking about something else entirely. The work is the thing. The work fills the space. At 9:30, Mrs. Haverstock comes to the schoolroom door. She does not come in. She has never in 2 years come into the schoolroom and sat down, which would involve treating the schoolroom as a room in her own house that she inhabits, which would in turn involve treating you as a colleague rather than a service. She stands in the doorway. She is 41. She's wearing a morning gown that cost more than your quarterly salary. She's not a bad woman. You have thought about this with some care, and you've concluded, not bad, just enclosed, just operating within a frame that doesn't invite her to look at the people inside it very closely. Miss Marsh. She looks past you at the children. Clara, are you sitting up properly? Clara, who has been sitting up perfectly properly, straightens further as a precautionary measure. I wanted to remind you, Mrs. Haverstock says, addressing a point approximately 3 inches to your left, that Mr. Haverstock's sister, Mrs. Pemberton, is coming for luncheon today, and she may bring her daughters. I'd like the girls to come to the drawing room at 12:30 to meet them. You'll see they're presentable. Of course. A pause. During the pause, Mrs. Haverstock does something she occasionally does, which is to look directly at you, as opposed to near you. It's a brief look, assessing. The kind of look that processes the information of your face and clothing and general presentational state, and produces a verdict, which verdict she keeps to herself, which is the correct social behaviour, but which does not make the process of being assessed any more comfortable. The Pemberton girls are very nicely brought up, she says. Mrs. Pemberton has done a wonderful job. 3 daughters, and the eldest engaged last autumn. How lovely, you say. You mean it to sound like exactly what it is, which is a neutral social response of no particular weight. You're not sure it comes out that way. You watch Mrs. Haverstock's face for evidence that it hasn't, and find nothing conclusive. 12:30, she says, and she is gone. Edith looks at the door, then at you, with the expression of someone who has perceived that something has just happened and is calculating what. What time is it now, you ask? 9:30, Edith says. Good. We have 3 hours. Page 43, please. You turn back to the blackboard and you write the first problem, pressing the chalk down more lightly now, preserving it, making it last. By 11 o'clock the arithmetic is done and you've moved to French, which Clara finds baffling and Edith finds straightforward, which means that the lesson involves a constant subtle calibration of attention, enough to help Clara without letting her feel she's being helped, Enough to challenge Edith without letting her feel she's coasting. This is the actual skill of teaching, the part they don't talk about. Not knowing the content, but managing the room. Knowing when to push and when to pull back. Knowing when the moment of confusion is productive and when it's tipping into the kind of discouragement that sets and hardens like plaster. You redo Clara's plait at 11. She sits in front of you with the practiced stillness of a child who's been having her hair managed by adults her entire life. And you unpin the straggling end and take the 3 sections and rebraid them with the quick efficiency of someone who has done this many times and who's also, in the privacy of their own room with no one watching, cried once or twice about not having children of their own to do this for. This is a thought you've rarely and dispose of quickly. You know perfectly well that children of your own would have required a husband, and a husband would have required either more beauty or less education or more willingness to perform the right kind of softness at the right kind of moment, and the cost-benefit analysis of all of that makes the whole exercise seem like a very poor exchange. Clara turns her head slightly to look at you. Miss Marsh. Stay still. Miss Marsh, do you think French is actually useful, or do ladies only learn it because it sounds nice? Both, you say. It's both. But really, if I'm in France, can I actually talk to people? Or is it a different kind of French? It's a different kind of French, but it's close enough that with practice you could manage. Have you been to France? Once, when I was 18. Was it nice? Very nice. Now stay still. Clara stays still. Edith, who's been listening to all of this with the focused attention of someone taking notes, says, "How did you go?" "On a ship." "Dover to Calais?" "Yes." "Were you seasick?" "Yes." Edith considers this. Was it worth it? You think about this for a moment. A June morning in 1866, standing on the deck of the ferry as the coast of France came up over the horizon, smelling of salt and engine smoke, feeling the particular stomach-dropping lurch of the boat in the chop, and also something else, something that had nothing to do with seasickness, something that felt like the world getting wider. You were 18. Your father was still alive. You believed still that things would arrange themselves correctly. Yes, you say. It was worth it. You pin off Clara's plait. You stand back. It will hold until perhaps 2 o'clock if Clara resists the urge to pull at it, which she almost certainly won't. At 12:15, you take both girls to the washroom on the 2nd floor to wash their hands and straighten their dresses and check their general state of presentability before the 12:30 drawing room command performance. This involves locating a missing hair ribbon, arguing constructively with Clara about the value of staying still while her collar is straightened, and performing an emergency reattachment of a button on Edith's cuff, with the needle and thread you carry in your bag for precisely this kind of situation. You do not go to the drawing room with them. You walk them to the door. You watch them go in, Edith first with her chin at the exactly correct angle, and Clara a half step behind, already forgetting to be properly composed but close enough that it won't matter. The door closes. You're standing in the hallway outside a room in which a social event is occurring. You're neither invited nor quite excluded. You could technically stand here in the hall and wait, and no one would tell you to go away. But that's not the same as being in the room. The room is the room where the Haverstock children are being presented to a married woman and her engaged daughter, and her younger daughters, who are presumably in the process of becoming engaged, and the room has a social logic that has no role for you. You go back upstairs to the schoolroom. You sit at your desk. You open the marking ledger. You begin reviewing Edith's French translation from last week, making small notes in the margin in pencil, corrections and questions, and one particularly pleased exclamation mark at a construction she's managed that you weren't sure she'd managed. The schoolroom is quiet. The house below is making the low-grade sound of luncheon being served, the movement of feet on stairs, the distant sound of the dining room door, the particular muffled by distance sound of adult voices talking about the things adult women of means talk about over luncheon in Devonshire Place. You've been doing this for long enough that the aloneness of it doesn't hurt anymore, mostly. Or rather, it hurts the way a healed break does, a structural soreness that activates under specific pressures and then subsides. The moments when it activates, drawing rooms you don't go into, dinner tables you eat at on one end with the children while the adults eat at the other, the sound of conversation carrying down the table like something you can see but not quite reach. Sunday mornings, walking to church alone, which you've done every Sunday for 11 years, and which you've decided finally after 11 years you're at peace with. You're not entirely at peace with it, but you have decided to decide that you are, and there is a pragmatic dignity in that. The smell of luncheon drifts up from the kitchen, up through the house, to the schoolroom on the 3rd floor. Roast something. Chicken, you think, and something with herbs and bread still warm and whatever the pudding is. You will eat your lunch in here, the tray brought up by Annie with the same slightly resentful efficiency with which Annie does all things. The tray will have soup and bread and a slice of cold meat, and perhaps, if cook is feeling generous, a piece of cake left from something made for the family. It is not humiliating. You have decided it is not humiliating. You have been deciding this for 2 years. Some days the decision holds more convincingly than others. Today you're not thinking about this. You're thinking about Edith's French and Clara's arithmetic and the geography lesson you'll need chalk for this afternoon, and whether the chemist will have carbolic soap, and also the lavender oil you need, because the bottle is nearly empty, and you've been stretching it for 2 weeks, adding more water, which means the scent is now so diluted it's barely doing anything at all. The lavender water is nearly out. This is a small thing. But it sits in the back of your mind with the patient weight of a small thing that will become a problem if left unaddressed. Annie arrives with the tray. She sets it on the corner of your desk with the careful placement of someone delivering something fragile, though the soup and bread are neither, and looks at the room with the expression of someone noting without comment that a person is eating alone in a schoolroom on the 3rd floor, while a luncheon is happening 2 floors below. Thank you, Annie. Annie leaves without comment. This is probably the kindest possible outcome. You eat. The soup is good. Barley and something vegetable, warm and thick. And the bread is fresh, and the cold meat is beef, not chicken as you'd thought. The cake is gingerbread. You eat it all methodically. Not because you're particularly hungry, but because the afternoon requires fuel, and because wasting food is a thought that produces in you a specific visceral discomfort that has its roots in a particular period of your early 20s that you do not think about directly, but that informs your relationship to resources in ways that are now entirely automatic. The girls come back at 1:30. Clara has somehow acquired a smear of something cream-coloured on her left sleeve. Origin unknown. Edith's ribbon is perfect. You take a cloth to clear a sleeve without asking how it happened, because the how of it will produce a story of impressive length and convolution, and you need the afternoon for geography. Was it nice, you ask? Meeting Mrs. Pemberton? She has a lot of daughters, Clara says, and they all said yes a lot. Clara, Edith says, with the tone of someone who has been enduring a companion's social commentary for 8 years and has developed significant tolerance. Mrs. Pemberton's eldest daughter is going to be married in June at St. George's in Hanover Square. How nice, you say. She's 22, Edith says. Mrs. Pemberton said it was a very good match. You pick up the remaining geography chalk and open the atlas to Europe. France is shaped like a hexagon, you say, which is one of the reasons the French are rather pleased with it. Clara's eyes come alive. Really? Because it's a shape? Because it's a particularly satisfying shape. Now, 6 sides. Can you tell me which countries are on each side? This is what you're good at. This is what you know. Not June weddings at St. George's, Hanover Square. Not the successful marrying of daughters. But this. France and its hexagonal self-satisfaction, and the countries arranged around it like a set of complicated neighbours, and 2 children sitting with their elbows on the desks and their chins in their hands, starting to care about something they didn't know they cared about 10 minutes ago. The afternoon passes, the chalk gives up at 4 o'clock, mid-lesson, and you substitute a thick pencil on the blackboard which does not work as well but does the job. At 5 o'clock you pack your bag, you put on your coat, you pin your hat. Tomorrow, you tell the girls, I want a page from Edith on the geography of the Rhine Valley, and from Clara a page on Clara, stop, what are you drawing? A page on the agricultural regions of France. All of them? Clara asks. 3? Pick your 3 favourites. Clara considers this. Cows or wine? Cheese, you say, which makes her laugh, and you leave them there, both of them laughing, which is not a bad way to end a Tuesday. You go back down the stairs, through the kitchen. Mrs. Beale barely looks up, the kitchen now in the full production mode of dinner preparation, and the smell has changed from the roast chicken of luncheon to something with beef, and the warm round smell of pastry going into the oven. Out through the service door, up the area steps, through the gate. Devonshire Place. In the early evening of a March Tuesday is colder than it was this morning, the light already starting to thicken toward dusk. You button your coat to the throat, you adjust your bag on your shoulder, the Haverstock house behind you, the street ahead, the long walk back. You need to go to the chemist's. This is the practical reality of your evening. You need lavender oil and carbolic soap, and, if they have it at a price you can manage, a small pot of cold cream, because the glycerin is almost finished and your hands are getting worse. The crack on the left knuckle is starting to catch on the woolen stockings when you fold them, and this is not manageable long term. You've calculated the expenditure. Lavender oil, 1 shilling and 2pence at Mr. Hobbs's on Tottenham Court Road if you buy the smaller bottle. Carbolic soap, 2pence. Cold cream, if they have the own brand rather than the named preparation, perhaps 6pence. 1 and 10pence. You're carrying 2 shillings, which covers it with 2pence remaining, which you will put in the small tin on your washstand that is accumulating slowly toward new gloves. The gloves you're wearing are 2 years old, and the right one has a repaired seam at the thumb that is becoming visible again. You've decided that the gloves will last until April, at which point the weather will be warm enough that you can rotate to summer gloves, which are thin cotton and which have no visible repairs. 2 more weeks. The right glove will hold for 2 more weeks. You walk south on Devonshire Place, turn onto Marylebone Road and head east. The streets are busier now, the 5 o'clock tide of men heading from offices towards stations and omnibus stops, women heading from shops toward wherever they're going, children finishing lessons and being collected by nursemaids or mothers. The movement is purposeful and dense and slightly aggressive, the way London movement always is at this hour. Everyone with somewhere to be, and the streets not quite wide enough to accommodate all the somewheres simultaneously. You are buffeted slightly at the corner of Portland Place by a man who does not look where he is going and does not apologise for not looking, and you recover your footing and keep walking. This is not worth the emotional energy of being annoyed by it. You have approximately a 15-minute walk to the chemist's, and you should use it for something productive, mentally, and a man who doesn't apologise for bumping you is not productive mental material. You think about the Rhine Valley. What you're going to tell Edith about the Rhine Valley, the particular way the river cuts through, the geography of it, the way the landscape determines the human story, the vineyards on the steep slopes, because that's the only place the sun hits at the right angle, the castles on the cliffs, because castles on cliffs are both defensible and impressive in a ratio that medieval European nobles found extremely satisfying. You think about Clara's face when you said France was hexagonal, and the French were pleased with it. You think about Mrs. Haverstock in the doorway, the 3 Pemberton daughters and their nice upbringing. The eldest engaged at 22, which means she has approximately 12 years before the world will start using the particular tone it uses. 12 years. You had 12 years once. You were 22 in 1870. You remember 22. You were living at 22 in a different world than this one, or perhaps the same world with a different set of expectations about what was coming. You were in Bristol at 22, working as companion to an elderly woman named Mrs. Fairfax, who was perfectly pleasant and who died in 1872, leaving you a small bequest that kept you for 6 months and a heartfelt letter of reference that has opened several doors since. Before Mrs. Fairfax you had been engaged. This is a fact you keep in the same part of your mind as the France trip, known, accessible, not examined routinely. His name was Thomas Alderton. He was a solicitor's son from Clifton. He was 26. The engagement lasted 11 months and ended in October 1870, when he married someone else instead. A fact which was conveyed to you via a letter from his mother that was more apologetic than the occasion strictly required, and which you have therefore always found slightly more insulting than one that wasn't. You are not bitter about this. You have performed the not being bitter about this for so long that it has become approximately true. You are occasionally in the small hours, when the house is very quiet and the sounds of the street are very faint, and the lavender sachets are making the room smell of careful preservation, something adjacent to sad about it. Not for Thomas Alderton specifically, who is not particularly remarkable in any way you can now identify, but for the version of yourself that believed the world was going to resolve itself in a particular direction, and did not yet know that it wasn't. That's not bitterness, that's just the structure of things, the way the future arrives, and is rarely the one you planned for. You arrive at Mr. Hobbs's chemist's on Tottenham Court Road at 5:45. The shop smells, as all good chemist shops smell, of a controlled collision between medicinal and pleasant, camphor and eucalyptus and coal tar, and underneath that the sweeter notes of the toilet preparations, the soaps and waters and creams and pomades that occupy the front of the shop in neat rows. The shop is warm. It has a small coal fire in the back, and the warmth radiates forward through the shelves, not quite reaching the front door, but warming appreciably by the second shelf. Mr. Hobbs himself is behind the counter. He's a slight man in his 60s with precisely trimmed sideburns and a white apron over his black coat, and he has waited on you approximately 40 times and has not, in 40 attendings, once given any indication of knowing who you are. This is fine. This is correct. You are a customer, not a social event. Good evening, you say. Good evening, miss. He has already started moving toward the relevant section, because 40 times is enough for professional inference. The lavender oil, the smaller. Yes, and carbolic soap. And do you have your own cold cream, not the Pond's? We do. Half ounce or full, you think? The half ounce will last 3 weeks. The full ounce will last 6. The full ounce costs 7 pence, the half 3.5. The per unit cost of the full ounce is better, but the upfront expenditure is higher by 3.5 pence, and 3.5 pence is not negligible. Full ounce, please. He wraps it all efficiently. Wax paper, brown paper, tied with string. He states the total. You count out the coins. He gives you the package and you put it in your bag. This is commerce. This is the daily exchange of small resources for necessary materials. Nothing romantic about it. Nothing humiliating about it either. It is simply the mechanism of a life managed on 14 shillings a week, which requires attention to the economics of cold cream and carbolic soap, with the same seriousness that the men at the Royal Exchange bring to the economics of cotton futures and shipping insurance. The scale is different. The principle is identical. You go back out into the street. The walk home takes 20 minutes. You go through Bloomsbury, past the British Museum's locked iron gates, past the small square where pigeons are doing their end-of-day business, past the familiar sequence of streets that are, after 2 years, so known to you that you navigate them by feel rather than thought. Gower Street, Mrs. Penworth's house, the blue front door. You go in. Mrs. Penworth is in the hall talking to Miss Ashford, and the conversation stops in that particular way conversations stop when a new person arrives. Not guiltily, but with the adjustment of social gears, the slight shift in posture and tone that signals the conversation was about something private and is now moving to something general. Miss Marsh, says Mrs. Penworth, there was a letter for you. She holds it out. White envelope. You take it. The handwriting on the front is your sister's. Thank you. Cold today, says Miss Ashford. Getting there. You go upstairs. Your rooms are as you left them. The cold has settled in during the hours you were out, the fire unlit, the air still and slightly flat. You put your bag on the desk. You put the chemist's package on the washstand. You take off your hat and your coat and hang them on the hook behind the door. You sit in the chair by the window. Your sister's letter. Margaret lives in Exeter with her husband, who is a doctor, and their 3 children, aged 9, 7, and 4. Margaret is 32. Margaret married at 23, which was the year Eleanor's own engagement ended, which timing Eleanor has sometimes reflected on with the particular irony of coincidence. Margaret's marriage is, as far as Eleanor can tell from the evidence of letters and the occasional visit, a genuine and working thing, a marriage built on compatible temperament and mutual respect, and a shared willingness to endure the small irritations of intimate cohabitation without letting them become catastrophic. You love your sister. You find her letters, approximately 60% of the time, comforting, and 40% of the time the way a slightly dull ache can become briefly sharp. Not in the letter itself, which is always warm and full of news about the children and the garden and occasionally a sharp observation about something in Exeter society that makes you laugh out loud, but in the gaps. The things letters don't say. The life the letter is evidence of. You open it. Dear Eleanor, Margaret writes, in her round, confident hand that has barely changed since she was 14. I hope you are well, and the Haverstock children are behaving themselves, particularly Clara, who sounds like she's wonderfully difficult. We are all well here. James has had a busy week as there has been something of a cough going around the parish, and he has kept running. The children are growing at a rate I cannot quite credit. Freddie, that is the 9-year-old, lost his second front tooth this week and is extremely pleased with himself. Lizzie wants me to tell you she has almost finished the sampler she's making for your birthday, which means I am now sworn to secrecy about what it says, which I note puts me in an impossible position since I've already mentioned it exists. Baby Joe is simply enormous, and I don't know where she puts it. She eats more than Freddie. And then, after 2 more paragraphs about the garden and a dinner party they attended last Saturday, I had lunch last week with Mrs. Hartley, and she tells me her cousin. Do you remember the Hartley cousin, the one from Sheffield who came to the Whitsun party 4 years ago? The slightly stout one with the red hair has just become engaged rather suddenly to a wool merchant, which Mrs. Hartley says is extremely satisfactory for everyone concerned, since the poor woman is 41 and everyone had rather given up. I confess I did not know quite what to say, so I said how wonderful and changed the subject. I know you will have more gracious feelings on the matter than I do, and perhaps more useful ones too. James says I should not say things like this, but he is not here at the moment, so I am going to add only that if a 41-year-old who everyone had given up on can manage a wool merchant from Sheffield, then Eleanor, there is really no excuse, and the world has plenty of prospects if you would only look at them. I say this with the full authority of someone who loves you enormously, and who is also, I admit, partially motivated by wanting to have you closer than Bristol. I love you extremely. Write soon. Your Margaret. You fold the letter. You put it in the bottom drawer with the others. Margaret. The authority of someone who loves you enormously. You are, in fact, quite sure that Margaret does love you enormously. You're also quite sure that Margaret does not know what she's talking about, and that this does not reduce the love, but that it does complicate the advice, and that any response to this letter will need to be composed with care so as to communicate both of these things simultaneously without hurting her feelings. You will write it tomorrow. Tonight you are tired and the room is cold and the chemist's package needs unpacking. You go to the washstand, you unwrap the cold cream and put it in its place. You unwrap the soap and swap it for the remaining sliver of old soap, setting the sliver on the windowsill to be used up last. You unwrap the lavender oil. You take the small brown bottle, uncork it, and hold it under your nose. Lavender. Actual lavender. The sharp green floral smell of it. Full strength, before it's been diluted, before it's been turned into water and dabbed onto wrists with 2 fingers. The smell of lavender at full strength is almost shockingly alive. Not the flat, slightly tired smell of dried sachets, but something with an edge to it, green and a little resinous and faintly medicinal. A smell that remembers being a plant rather than a preparation. You mix the water. You have a small glass bottle, emptied and cleaned, and you add the oil carefully, 6 drops, 7, the dropper pausing while you calculate, and then the water and the small amount of spirits from the bottle in the bottom drawer, and you recork it and shake it gently, watching the oil and water begin to find each other. You put it back on the washstand, then you light the fire. This is a nightly negotiation with yourself, how long to wait before lighting the fire. Every hour you don't light it is coal you save, money you retain. But cold rooms past a certain point become unproductive. You can't read comfortably or write comfortably or think comfortably when you're cold. And the work of keeping yourself warm through pure willpower is a kind of expenditure too. You've established through trial and error that 6:30 is the correct time. After 6:30, the benefit of warmth outweighs the cost of coal. It is 6:40. You've been sitting with the letter longer than you thought. The fire takes quickly. You have a knack for it now. The right amount of paper, the right arrangement of kindling, the first match in exactly the right place. Within 10 minutes there is a proper fire, and within 20 the room has started to acquire something approaching warmth. The cold retreating from the centre and persisting only near the window and the exterior wall. You pull the curtain, you settle in the chair. You have a book, Middlemarch, which you've read twice before but which improves with repetition. Every return finding something you missed the previous time, the way a room looks different at different hours of the day. You open it to where you left off, somewhere in the middle, where Dorothea Brooke is in the middle of making an error she cannot yet identify as an error, which is perhaps the most accurate description of how most significant errors feel from the inside. But before you read, you do something you do every evening. You take a small notebook from the drawer, brown leather, cheap, bought from a stationery shop in Holborn for 4p. You open it to the current page, which is Tuesday, and you pick up your pen. You write. Not a diary exactly. Not in the confessional sense. You don't write your feelings down in the way that would make them available to anyone who found the notebook, including yourself on a bad day. You write observations, notes, the small things that happened, the things that interested you, the things you noticed. Today, Clara's question about France, the way the chalk felt between your fingers when it was down to an inch, the smell of the Haverstock kitchen in the morning, coal and bread and coffee, the way Edith's penmanship looks like armour, the look on Mrs. Haverstock's face in the doorway, the particular quality of the cold on Devonshire Place at 5 o'clock, the smell of lavender oil at full strength, the fact that it smells alive before it's been diluted into something more manageable, more social, more correct. You write this down. Then you close the notebook, put it back in the drawer, and open Middlemarch. An hour passes. The fire settles. The room warms. Outside on Gower Street, the evening traffic thins to occasional carts and footsteps, and at 8:30, the watchman's call, "All's well, all's well," which is both reassuring and faintly comic, given the number of ways in which things are not well, though probably not the specific ways the watchman is authorised to address. You become aware, gradually, of the smell of your room in the warmth. It's different in the warmth. Cold rooms smell of cold, which is a blunting of other smells, a kind of sensory compression. Warm rooms let things breathe. The lavender in the drawer is releasing its scent more freely now. The fresh lavender water on the washstand, the diluted bottle you mixed earlier, is adding its note. The coal fire has its own contribution, warm, slightly sulphurous, the smell of heat produced by Victorian infrastructure. And there is, in the aggregate of all of it, a smell that is simply the smell of this room, this life, this particular arrangement of one woman's daily existence. You catch it the way you sometimes catch the smell of your own skin, unexpectedly from an unfamiliar angle, suddenly aware of something that is always there but rarely noticed. The room smells of lavender and coal and books and cold cream and the carbolic undertone of your soap and the particular mineral note of the water in this part of London, and something else, something underneath all of those things, that is just you. Your hair and your skin and the specific chemistry of a body going about its business. It is not a bad smell. It is not in any technical or measurable sense a problematic smell. You are clean. You are well maintained. You have spent money you could have spent elsewhere on making sure that you are clean and well maintained, because this is not vanity but armour, the same as Edith's penmanship, the same as the fresh collars rotating through the week. But you know that this smell, or rather the idea of this smell, the story told about it, is something that precedes you, that walks into rooms before you do. That sits in the minds of people like Mrs. Haverstock in the doorway, and the woman on Oxford Street with her fur tippet, and Margaret with a wool merchant from Sheffield logic, informing what they see before they've quite looked. The old maid smell. Not what you smell, what they expect you to smell. And here is the thing that 11 years has taught you, the thing that you could not have articulated at 22, or even at 26, but that you now understand with the clarity that comes from living inside a thing long enough to see its structure. The smell is not yours. It never was. The smell is theirs. It belongs to the people who invented it, to the century that needed it to exist, that required a specific olfactory category for women who had not fulfilled the specific expectation, because categories make things manageable, and the unmanageable is frightening, and a woman living alone and self-supporting and apparently not disintegrating is, to a certain kind of mind, extremely unmanageable. The smell is the story, and the story is not about you. This does not mean it doesn't land. Stories that are not about you can still hit you in the chest. The fact that a thing is invented does not make it weightless. You carry the weight of it every day, in the fresh collars and the lavender water, and the careful calibration of your coat buttons, and the not going to the drawing room when the Pemberton daughters are in it. You carry it in the small tin accumulating toward new gloves. You carry it in the way you hold your shoulders when you walk through Oxford Street alone at 5 o'clock, which is not slouching, not apologising for taking up space, not making yourself smaller, because you made a decision sometime in the middle years that the posture of your body was not negotiable. That was yours, that one they couldn't have. You close Middlemarch, you bank the fire, you wash your face with the cold water remaining in the pitcher. The hot water tray was 3 hours ago before dinner, and there's no point calling for more. Cold water, carbolic soap, the cloth on the towel rail. You work the cold cream into your hands. You take down your hair, 1 pin at a time, and brush it, not 100 strokes, 75, and re-braid it loose for sleeping. You put on the second nightgown. You check the window latch. You snuff the candle. In the dark, with fire subsiding to a warm glow, the room smells of coal and lavender and the carbolic soap and the cold cream and you, and the smell is yours, and it is enough. Wednesday comes with the particular indifference of a middle-of-the-week morning. No special quality to it, no promise of something different, just the bells and the cold and the Gower Street sounds arriving in layers as consciousness returns. The fire in the grate is dead ash. The water in the pitcher is cold. The room smells of last night's coal smoke and lavender and the residue of your existence. You dress in the dark again. Same sequence, same efficiency. The chemise, the stays, the blouse. Today, the other blue one. The one with the smaller collar, because Wednesday is schoolroom heavy, and the smaller collar stays neater through the day. You brush your hair. 75 strokes. You pin it up. You open the new lavender water, properly diluted now, properly mixed. The scent holding its structure rather than the flat, exhausted performance of the old bottle. And you apply it the correct way. 2 fingers dipped, lightly, to the left wrist, the right wrist, and the base of the throat. Not more than that. the correct amount, the signal without the desperation. This is a skill you've refined over 11 years, and it is genuinely a skill, not a vanity. Calibrating the scent of yourself for public presentation. Too little, and the morning smell of a body. Any person who has spent the night being a mammal in a closed room, comes through at moments when you'd prefer it not to. Too much, and you've crossed a line from maintain to trying, and trying is a category that reads as anxiety, and anxiety reads as a woman who is aware of her own precarity, and a woman aware of her own precarity is a woman other people become uncomfortable around because her awareness is a mirror. The correct amount of lavender water says, I have attended to this matter and am now moving on. You move on. Breakfast on the tray, 2 slices of bread, tea. This morning the marmalade does not come because yesterday was Tuesday and the next marmalade day is Friday. This is fine. You eat without the marmalade. You watch Gower Street. A horse has lost a shoe somewhere south of here, and the cart it is attached to has created a brief knot of traffic that unravels itself in about 6 minutes through the application of shouting. A woman walks past with a basket of early spring flowers. Some kind of violet, you think, though from this height it's hard to tell. Her head down, moving quickly in the cold. You finish your tea, you go out. The walk to Devonshire Place is today punctuated by the chemist's shop you don't go into, which is a different shop from Mr. Hobbs, a more aspirational establishment on Great Portland Street, the kind with a mahogany counter and glass cases and the named preparations arranged with the seriousness of museum exhibits. You've been in it once 2 years ago, when you first took the Haverstock position and were investigating the geography of the neighbourhood. The soaps in this shop are wrapped in waxed paper with printed labels. The violet soap costs 8 pence. The rose soap costs 9 pence. There is a preparation called Rimmel's Bouquet de l'Impératrice that costs 1 shilling and 4 pence for a small bottle and smells, as far as you could tell from the demonstration sample on the counter, of tuberose and something else heavy and slightly tropical, which is exactly what you would smell like if you were the kind of woman who wore Rimmel's Bouquet de l'Impératrice, which is a kind of woman you have never been and are not sure you'd recognize. You don't go in today, you keep walking. But you think about it. You think about it the way you think about France, with a kind of wistful precision. Not longing exactly, but the acknowledgement of a world that exists parallel to yours, where different choices are made with different resources. The women who buy Rimmel's Bouquet de l'Impératrice. The women who have hot water brought to their rooms twice a day. The women who have ladies' maids who do the corset lacing and whose collars don't need to be turned because they're replaced before they reach the turning stage. These women also smell of something. Everything smells of something. But their smell is not called the old maid smell, because the category doesn't apply to them. They have been successfully placed within the correct social taxonomy. They smell of correctly occupied positions. They smell of wives and daughters and mothers and the particular olfactory signatures of women whose existences have been sanctioned. What you smell of is the absence of sanction. And here is the thing that you've been turning over, the thing that the lavender water and the carbolic soap and the carefully calibrated collar situation cannot quite resolve, no matter how precisely managed. The old maid smell is not about hygiene. It was never about hygiene. The Victorians are obsessed with hygiene. The 19th century has produced more soap, more preparation, more written instruction about the proper management of the human body than any previous era. And this is not an accident. The obsession with cleanliness is directly correlated with the century's anxiety about bodies, about what bodies do when left unmanaged. about the diseases that travel through air and water and contact and which have been killing people at staggering rates in overcrowded industrial cities, and also about the more philosophical and social anxieties about what an unmanaged body might do if given the opportunity. The management of the body is the management of the self. The management of the self is the management of social position. The management of social position is the management of the whole elaborate anxious structure of Victorian England. Miss Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to qualify as a doctor in Britain, which she did in 1869, which is 13 years ago, which still feels recent enough to be shocking to a significant portion of the population, has written about the body. She has written rather courageously about what the scientific and medical establishment of her era understands and misunderstands about women's bodies specifically. The medical literature of 1882 contains opinions about women's bodies that would, in a different century, be considered fiction. It contains the opinion, widely held, that menstruation produces a substance called menotoxin that causes flowers to wilt and bread to fail to rise. It contains the opinion that the uterus and the brain are in direct competition, and that education draws vital energy from the reproductive organs, which is why educating women is dangerous. It contains, most relevantly to your present situation, the opinion that an unmarried woman's body is a body in a state of biological malfunction, not yet complete, waiting for the completion that only marriage can provide, and that the longer this waiting goes on, the more the body begins to express its own frustration in physical ways that other people can detect. The medical basis for this is completely fabricated. You know this because you have read, carefully, everything you could get your hands on that challenged it, including some things that were not considered appropriate reading for women and that you found in the lending library on Charing Cross Road, which has a helpful policy of not monitoring what its female patrons borrow. You know the science of it, or rather you know the absence of science, the gap where science should be, the place where assumption and social need and the self-interest of a medical establishment, composed entirely of men, has filled in the space that observation and evidence were supposed to occupy. But knowing the absence of science does not make the social fact disappear. Social facts are not dissolved by evidence. The old maid smell is not a medical observation. It is a social technology. It is the mechanism by which a category is maintained, by which the boundary between acceptable and unacceptable female existence is enforced. You cannot smell wrong if you smell right. You cannot smell right if you are wrong. And wrong means unmarried. Wrong means insufficient. Wrong means the story is not going where it was supposed to go. This is what the lavender water is for. This is what all of it is for. The fresh collars, the glycerin, the cold cream, the 75 brush strokes, the whole careful daily edifice of maintained respectability. Not vanity, not hope. Something more pragmatic and more complicated. The daily performance of not smelling like what they've decided you smell like. The refusal to confirm the story they're already telling. You arrive at the Haverstock house. Annie is on the front steps with her stone. She looks up. "Cold this morning," she says. Her face is red with it. Her hands reddened from the cold and the wet stone. "Very," you agree. She goes back to her work. You go down the area steps. The Wednesday schoolroom is geography and Latin. You've been teaching Edith Latin for 4 months, tentatively, with the understanding that Mrs. Haverstock has not specifically approved this and is not likely to if asked directly, but that she has also not specifically prohibited it. and that the space between prohibition and permission in a Victorian household is considerable, and you have chosen to operate in it? Edith asked. You could not see a reason to say no that was not in some essential way dishonest. Clara cannot yet manage Latin and has been given the interim task of improving her French, which she finds baffling, to a level where Latin will at least be possible. This is an optimistic timetable. Edith arrives first, 7 minutes before the hour. She has clearly been downstairs already this morning, because she smells of breakfast and the particular warm house smell of the Haverstock interior. Better coal than your coal, better curtains keeping the warmth in, the smell of a house that is heated with confidence rather than economy. She puts her Latin Premier on the desk. I did the exercise, she says, all of it. Show me. She opens the Premier to the page. 6 lines of Latin, each word neatly underlined with its function, subject, verb, object, in the manner you showed her. The translation is in her controlled hand beside each line. You read through it. She has made 2 errors, both in the same construction. The ablative absolute, which is the construction that defeats most beginning Latin students, because it requires a mental flexibility around verb forms that does not come naturally to a brain that has been trained on English. You have made this error yourself. Everyone makes this error. These 2, you say, pointing. Look at the construction again. What does the ablative absolute indicate? Edith studies it. Her face does the thing it does when she's thinking carefully. A slight compression around the eyes, the kind of focused stillness that in an adult would be called concentration, and in a child is sometimes mistaken for not paying attention. The circumstance, she says slowly, something happening at the same time as the main action, or before it. The relationship is more flexible than English allows. So this phrase, what is it literally saying? She works through it. She gets to the right answer in about 4 minutes, which is good. You mark the corrections, you note the exercise in the ledger, you return the primer. Clara arrives at 3 minutes past the hour, her plait already showing early signs of distress. She sits down. She opens her French book with the air of someone receiving a sentence. Bonjour, Clara, you say. Bonjour, Miss Marsh, Clara says, in the accent of someone who has decided French is pronounced exactly as it's written, which it spectacularly is not. Vous allez bien? A pause. Clara's face cycles through recognition, retrieval and construction. Je vais bien? She inflects it as a question, which is either correct social register or uncertainty about whether she's right. And with Clara, it's genuinely hard to tell. Je vais bien, you confirm. Merci. Et vous? Clara looks at you with the expression of someone who's been handed a puzzle. They're fairly sure they can solve, but want a moment to be certain. Et vous? Et vous? She grins. She's found it. This is what Clara looks like when she finds something. Not quiet satisfaction, but open pleasure. The expression of someone who has discovered that the thing was simpler than they feared. You like this about her very much. The morning passes. At 11:15 you have a moment when both girls are working independently. Edith on a Latin translation, Clara on French grammar exercises that have been calibrated to be challenging without being impossible. And you allow yourself to sit back in your chair and look at the room. The chalk is new today. A full stick, 3 inches. You bought it yesterday from a stationer's on Euston Road, a small packet of 6 sticks for 2pence, which will last approximately 3 weeks if you're careful. The blackboard has Wednesday's work on it, a timeline of Roman history that you drew in careful lines this morning before the girls arrived, because a visual timeline is a better teaching tool than a list of dates, and because drawing it required you to think about the sequence of events yourself, which is its own kind of pleasure. You look at the timeline, Caesar, Augustus, Nero, the Antonines, the decline, the fall. There is something that Eleanor Marsh finds, privately, quite interesting about the Roman Empire. Not the military history, the battles and campaigns and conquest, the things the textbooks emphasize, but the texture of it, the way people lived inside it, the women specifically, because the women are always the harder research, the ones whose lives you have to reconstruct from the gaps in the record, from the things mentioned briefly by men writing about other things. Roman women who ran businesses while their husbands were away at wars. Roman women who owned property, which Victorian women technically can't do until the Married Women's Property Act of 1870, and even then within limits. Roman women who wrote, occasionally some of whose writing survived, most of whom it didn't, most of whose lives are simply gone. The unmarried ones, the widowed ones, the ones who for whatever reason move through the world without the structural support of a legal husband. You've read about them. The Vestals, who were not married because they were married to Rome, to the sacred fire, and who were given legal rights and property and public respect in exchange for 30 years of celibacy. The freed slave women who ran their own businesses, the women in between the categories, the ones who don't fit the historiography, who appear briefly in a legal document or a piece of graffiti and then disappear. Every era has its taxonomy of women. Every era has its category for the women who don't fit. Every era has a smell it assigns to those women. You pick up your pen. You write a note in the margin of the lesson book, not for the girls but for yourself. Vestal virgins, property rights, check sources. Edith looks up. Are you writing? Making a note. What about? Roman women, something for a future lesson. Edith considers this. Miss Marsh. Yes. Did Roman women have tutors, like us? The wealthier ones, yes, often Greek tutors, because Greek was considered the more sophisticated language. Latin was the practical language. Greek was the mark of culture. What did the poorer ones do? Learned what their mothers could teach them, worked, survived. Edith takes this in. She goes back to her translation. Then, after a moment, Miss Marsh, do you think it matters, being educated? You hold a pen still for a moment. You consider the question with the seriousness it deserves. I think, you say carefully, that it has mattered to me, that it has given me work I find interesting, and the ability to read things that have interested me, and to think about things that interest me, and to have conversations like this one that I find genuinely valuable. A pause. Whether it has mattered in the way the world measures mattering is a different question. Edith is quiet. She's 11. She's sitting with this. Mama says education for girls is for Polish, she says at last, like silver. So you look nicer. Some people think that. What do you think? You look at her. The controlled handwriting. The ablative absolute that she worked out herself. The Latin primer she's choosing to carry every day, and you have not asked her to carry home. I think, you say, that you should learn the ablative absolute so well that you can use it correctly without thinking, and then you should use it as often as possible, and that what it is for is a question that you will have a better answer to in 20 years than either of us has now. Edith looks at you for a moment. Then she nods once and goes back to her translation. Clara, who has been listening to all of this with the attentive peripheral awareness of a child who is good at appearing to be absorbed in something else, writes something in her exercise book that is not, you are fairly certain, the French grammar exercise. You decide not to ask what it is. Luncheon comes and goes, the tray arrives, you eat, The soup today is lentil, thicker than yesterday's barley, with a slight smokiness that suggests Mrs. Beale put a ham bone in it, which is generous, which you appreciate. The afternoon. At 3 o'clock, while Clara is working on her geography exercise and Edith is reading, a book you chose, a historical novel that involves both adventure and a considerable amount of period-accurate detail about life in ancient Alexandria, which Edith is reading with the focused attention of someone converting it into information. You hear voices downstairs, not the ordinary sounds of the house, footsteps on stairs, doors, the distant clatter of the kitchen. Voices, plural, with the particular social pitch of a drawing-room afternoon, which means there are callers. This is not unusual. Mrs. Haverstock receives on Wednesday afternoons, which you know because 2 years of Wednesday tray lunches in the schoolroom have taught you the rhythms of this household, as precisely as you know the rhythms of your own rooms. Clara looks up. Is that Aunt Frances? I don't know. It sounds like Aunt Frances. Aunt Frances has a very loud laugh. A pause. I like Aunt Frances. You return to the marking you're doing, which is last week's history essay from Edith. A clean, careful paragraph on the causes of the English Civil War that is correct in every factual particular and entirely devoid of the kind of personal engagement that would make it interesting. Edith's essay is read like someone who has learned exactly what an essay is supposed to look like, and is producing that, and is not yet convinced that the essay itself wants anything from her beyond technical accuracy. You write in the margin, in pencil, what did ordinary people think? Not the generals, the shopkeeper, the mother. Who else was there? Clara puts down her pencil. Miss Marsh. Clara. If I were a Roman girl, would I still have to learn French? You'd be learning Greek. Clara makes a face. Is Greek harder than French? Different. It has an entirely different alphabet. That seems excessive, Clara says. Languages often are, you agree. At 4:30 you hear something below that is not the ordinary afternoon caller sounds. A raised voice, not angry but insistent, and then a door closing sharply, and then silence. You make no outward sign of having heard this. The girls, trained by years of living in a house with adults, also make no outward sign, which is its own kind of training. The childhood education in how to inhabit a domestic space without appearing to notice the things that happen in it. At 5 o'clock you pack your bag. The girls are let out. You go down. In the kitchen, Mrs. Beale is stirring something on the range with the concentrated attention of someone who's not going to be interrupted regardless of what is happening in the rest of the house. Sarah is at the table peeling potatoes with the automatic rhythm of repetition. Annie is somewhere else. The kitchen smells of what will be dinner, something with onions again, which seems to be the current culinary refrain, and bread, always bread, and the coal fire. Good evening, you say. Evening, Miss Marsh, Mrs. Beale says, not turning from the range. Is everything all right? A pause. The spoon keeps moving. As it is, Mrs. Beale says, which is the answer that answers nothing and everything simultaneously. And you've been in domestic service long enough to recognize it as a communication, not an evasion. You go out. The street. The cold. March insisting on itself, refusing to warm. You button your coat and pull your bag higher on your shoulder and head south. You're thinking about the voice you heard. The closed door. The particular texture of a domestic atmosphere in which something has happened that everyone is navigating around. In 2 years with the Haverstock family, you have accumulated a quiet knowledge of their interior life that is one of the stranger features of your position. You know things you were never told. You know that Mr. and Mrs. Haverstock do not sleep in the same room, that the large front bedroom is hers and the smaller dressing room has a bed that gets slept in. You know that Clara once cried for an hour over something that happened at the Sunday dinner table and refused to say what it was. You know that Edith, for all her careful composure, wakes up afraid sometimes. You've heard it through the wall of the schoolroom when you've stayed late. The sound of footsteps in the room above and then voices. You know none of this in any way that can be shared or used. You know it the way you know everything in these households, by proximity, by the accumulation of small observations, by being present in the spaces between things. The governess position is its own particular form of invisibility. You're there enough to see everything. You're not there enough to be seen doing it. This is the paradox that you have never quite resolved. You know the Haverstock family with a kind of intimacy that their own relatives probably don't possess, and you are simultaneously the person they know least. Mrs. Haverstock's sister-in-law knows more about Eleanor Marsh, the social category, than Mrs. Haverstock does about Eleanor Marsh, the actual person. The sister-in-law can construct a story. Mrs. Haverstock has what you've chosen to present, which is professional, competent and quiet about everything else. You've thought about this, in the evenings, in your chair by the fire. The invisibility is protective and costly in roughly equal measure. It protects you from a specific kind of exposure. Your life, its history, its choices, being assessed by people who won't have the context for it and don't particularly want to acquire it. It costs you the thing that all invisibility costs, the sense of being seen, not looked at, seen, which are very different things. The look in Mrs. Haverstock's doorway was a look. The look from the woman on Oxford Street was a look. The look from the man in the coffee house. But you haven't been in a coffee house in 18 months. You're manufacturing this example, slotting it in where it fits the pattern. You are seen, if you're being honest, by 2 people with any regularity. Margaret, who sees you through the lens of sisterly love and wifely comparison, which is a lens, not a window. And Miss Ashford, who says almost nothing, but who occasionally in the hallway of Mrs. Penworth's house looks at you with the expression of someone who has been exactly where you are and has some views on the territory. Tonight, coming home at 6:15, you encounter Miss Ashford on the landing outside your rooms. She's carrying a tray. She always eats in her room too, though for different reasons. And she's wearing a neat dark dress and a knitted shawl over her shoulders, the shawl being in a shade of deep blue that is the one concession to colour in what is otherwise a carefully grey wardrobe. Her hair is beautifully dressed, the grey of it pinned in smooth waves that are genuinely lovely, the kind of hair that arrives at grey with elegance rather than resignation. She smells, you notice this because the hallway is narrow and you're both in it, of straw and hat materials, and underneath that, very faintly, of lily of the valley. Not a strong scent, a trace, the suggestion of something deliberate. Miss Marsh, she steps to let you pass. Miss Ashford, you're both being polite, the polite of people who share a house and a social category without having particularly chosen each other as companions, and then, because the landing is narrow and your doors are adjacent and the moment would otherwise be simply uncomfortable, you say, "Is that lily of the valley? It's very nice." Miss Ashford looks slightly surprised. Then something in her face adjusts, relaxes slightly, the way people's faces do when they've been waiting to be noticed doing something and have given up expecting it. Toilet water? I've had it for years. You can't get it anywhere now. The shop closed. She looks at the small tray she's carrying as if checking whether her dinner is still where she left it. I use it very sparingly. It suits the season, you say. Lily of the Valley is spring. That's what I always thought. She pauses. Mrs. Penworth says there's hot water in the bathroom from 8 to 10 tomorrow evening. Thursday, if you wanted it. Thank you, she nods. She goes into her room. Her door closes softly. The bathroom. This requires some explanation. Mrs. Penworth's house has one bathroom, which is a more progressive arrangement than many lodging houses in 1882 London. There are still houses where washing of any serious kind is done entirely in one's room, basin and pitcher, with no access to actual running hot water at all, or access to a copper in the kitchen that must be booked and timed and shared. Mrs. Penworth has a bathroom on the first floor, fitted with a cast-iron tub and a geyser that produces hot water in sufficient quantity for a bath. If the geyser is properly lit and the coal is good, the bathroom is available for lodger use on a schedule. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 8 to 10, sign the book downstairs, 20 minutes in the bathroom, which is enough time for a proper bath if you're efficient about it, and the geyser cooperates. The bath. You've been thinking about the bath since Tuesday, not in an indulgent way, not with the fantasy quality of advertisements for scented preparations showing women reclining in curtained tubs surrounded by impossible quantities of hot water and time, in a practical way. The practical fact of a body that has been managed all week with cold water and basin and cloth, that has been walking through coal smoke and chalk dust and horse dung and all the other ambient materials of London, and that needs at some point during the week to be actually thoroughly cleaned. The weekly bath is a significant operation, not because it is luxurious. It isn't exactly in the bathroom of a Bloomsbury lodging house in March, with 20 minutes allotted and a geyser that makes an alarming noise when it starts up. But it matters in the way that all the small dignities matter, in the way that the lavender water and the fresh collar and the 75 brush strokes matter. It is the weekly restoration of a specific feeling about yourself that erodes slightly every day of the week. The feeling of cleanliness as a complete and total thing, not just the managed maintenance of the face and hands. You write your name in the book downstairs for Thursday, 8 o'clock. Then you go up. You light the fire. You make tea on the small spirit stove you keep in your sitting room. A small economy that saves you asking Sarah to bring tea up every evening. Because every time you ask Sarah for something that is technically included in your rent, but is practically an imposition on Sarah's already considerable workload, you feel the specific discomfort of someone who is used to managing things themselves and finds asking for help a more complicated transaction than it technically should be. Tea, bread, with the last of last week's marmalade scraped from the jar. You sit in your chair, you open Margaret's letter again. If a 41-year-old who everyone had given up on can manage a wool merchant from Sheffield, then Eleanor there is really no excuse. Margaret means this kindly. This is the thing you have to remember reading Margaret. She means everything kindly. She is not cruel. She is simply inside her life so completely that the view from inside it has become, for her, indistinguishable from the view of the world. The view from inside Margaret's life. Marriage is the correct outcome, available to everyone who wants it with sufficient effort, and the women who haven't achieved it have either not wanted it enough or not tried correctly. And now that the deadline of the 40s is approaching, The question has a new urgency that loves you enough to tell you about a wool merchant from Sheffield. The view from outside Margaret's life. The wool merchant from Sheffield is marrying a 41-year-old woman because he needs something that she offers. Perhaps money, perhaps connections, perhaps simply domestic management, perhaps genuine affection, perhaps all four, and she's accepting because she has decided that whatever he offers is worth whatever she's giving in exchange. And this is a private transaction between two people that says nothing at all about Eleanor Marsh, who is 34 and who is not available for comparison. You put the letter in the drawer, you open your notebook, you write, "The smell is a story they tell," about the space where a woman should be and isn't. The absence of a man reads as presence of something else, something that has gone wrong, something detectable. But you cannot smell an absence. You look at this. Then you write underneath. Or can you? What does absence smell like? You think about this for a moment, pen hovering. Then, the lavender sachets, preservation, the camphor, waiting, the lily of the valley worn sparingly for years because the shop that sold it closed and the supply will eventually run out. The care of finite resources. Is that the smell? Not failure, but economy. Not loneliness, but the management of what's there. You put the pen down. You read Middlemarch until 9. Dorothea Brooke is still making her error. The error is beginning to have consequences. The consequences are, as they always are in Eliot, more complicated than they appeared in Prospect. You bank the fire, you wash, you take down your hair. In the dark, before sleep, you think about the bathroom on Thursday, the hot water, the tub, the 20 minutes of being thoroughly, completely clean, no economy, no calculation, just water and soap, and the specific relief of maintenance completed all at once, rather than in careful sections. Some things are simply what they are. Thursday comes. The schoolroom is Latin for Edith and map drawing for Clara, who has discovered that geography expressed as visual information is more interesting to her than geography expressed as text, and who is currently drawing a map of France with a level of detail and embellishment that suggests she has been thinking about the hexagonal France comment considerably more than her exercise books indicate. Her France has mountains and rivers and a small drawing of a cow in the corner labelled vache, which is the French word for cow which she has remembered without being asked. Did you look that up yourself, you ask? Papa has a French dictionary, Clara says. I borrowed it. Did you ask? A pause. I put it back. You make a note in the margin of your own book. Clara, independent research. Note to Mrs. H. Whether to tell Mrs. Haverstock that Clara is borrowing her father's French dictionary without asking, and labelling cows in French is a question of calibration. If you mention it, it reads as praise, which might result in encouragement, or it might result in a conversation about whether girls need this kind of initiative, which is a conversation you'd rather not have. If you don't mention it, the dictionary continues to be borrowed, and the cows continue to be labelled, which seems like an acceptable outcome. You do not mention it. In the afternoon, during independent work, you hear Mrs. Haverstock on the stairs. She's talking to someone. A woman's voice. Not a visitor this time, but the housemaid's higher register answering questions. The conversation moves up the stairs, passes the schoolroom door, goes to the next floor. This is unusual. Mrs. Haverstock does not generally come to this floor in the afternoon. The voices stop outside what must be one of the upper bedroom doors. Something about linen, a discussion about moths, the specific smell of storage, camphor, mentioned by name, in the pragmatic tone of a woman discussing household maintenance rather than anything more laden. Clara looks up from a map, looks at the ceiling as if she can hear through it. "Carry on," you say. Clara carries on. Later, on your way out at 5, you pass Mrs. Haverstock in the hall below. She's carrying a small bundle of cloth, something removed from storage, and she's frowning at it with the focused attention of someone identifying a problem. She looks up. "Miss Marsh." Something accessory in the look again. Then, "Do you know anything about camphor? The correct amount for storage?" "A little. For woolens. A cedar block will do what camphor does, if you can get one that's genuinely aromatic. The camphor is more aggressive on moths, but it does transfer to the fabric." Mrs. Haverstock looks at the cloth in her hand. "It transfers?" "The smell. It comes out with airing mostly, but some fabrics hold it." A pause. She looks at you. "How do you know this?" "I manage my own clothes," you say. It is not an accusation. It is simply a fact, plainly stated. Mrs. Haverstock looks at you for a moment with the expression you can never quite read. Then she looks back at the cloth. "Thank you, Miss Marsh." You go out. You walk home. The cold is the same cold. The streets are the same streets. But you're thinking about the camphor on Mrs. Haverstock's fabric, and the smell that transfers and mostly comes out with airing, and the fact that you knew the answer because you manage your own clothes, and that this knowledge, this practical knowledge, earned through the daily management of a material life, is not visible as knowledge in the usual categories. It is not Latin. It is not French. It is not history or geography, or the causes of the English Civil War. It does not appear in a lesson book, but it is knowledge. It is the knowledge of women who live carefully, who know what camphor does to fabric because they have been managing fabric for 11 years with more care than the people who can afford not to manage it, who know the difference between cedar and camphor because the difference matters to them in a way it does not matter to a woman whose maid handles the storage. You think about this the whole way home, the particular curriculum of the life you've been living, what it's taught you, what you know. You do not have a husband's name. You do not have a household of your own, or a drawing room to receive in, or a maid to bring up twice daily hot water. You do not have a daughter getting married in June at St. George's, Hanover Square. You have Latin and French and the history of the Roman Empire and the geography of the Rhine Valley and the smell of lavender at full strength and the correct ratio of water to oil and the knowledge of camphor and cedar and what good wool feels like between your fingers and what an ablative absolute does, and the face Clara makes when she finds the thing she was looking for, and the careful, present knowledge of 2 children who are becoming people right in front of you, while no one else is watching closely enough to see. This is what you have. It is not nothing. Mrs. Penworth's house, the blue door, the stairs, your rooms, cold, the fire not yet lit, and the smell of the room as it is at 6 o'clock on a Thursday in March, coal ash and lavender and cold air and paper, and the mineral smell of the washstand water, and underneath all of it, the smell of this life, this particular arrangement of one person's chosen and unchosen circumstances. You light the fire at 6:30, exactly as always. You eat your dinner. Tonight it is cold meat from yesterday's joint and bread, and the apple you bought from a vendor near the British Museum for a halfpenny. And you drink your tea and you sit in your chair and you read, and the fire settles and the room warms. At 8 o'clock you take your towel and your soap and your wrapper, and you go downstairs to the bathroom. The geyser makes its alarming noise when you light it, a low rushing groan, followed by a high keening, followed by a clunk that always makes you briefly wonder whether something has gone wrong, and then the quiet, settling rumble that means the water is heating. You've been using this bathroom for 2 years. You know the geyser's vocabulary. The tub fills slowly. The hot water comes in a reliable stream, not enough to fill the tub quickly, but enough to fill it completely if you're patient. You add cold water from the tap to get the temperature right. Not cold, never cold, not tonight. Tonight you want genuinely warm water, the kind that immediately begins to do something to a body that has been carefully managing cold and tepid all week. You test it with your hand, right? Yes. You get in. The heat is immediate and total. It hits the soles of your feet first, then your legs, then as you lower yourself in, your hips, your back, your shoulders. The warmth moves into muscles that have been holding themselves against the cold for days, and something releases, not dramatically, not the way that would make you cry, but quietly, an increment of tension leaving without announcement. The water smells of the geyser, faintly metallic, the iron smell of the tank, and of your carbolic soap, which you're using here too, and very faintly, carried from your skin, of lavender. The room smells of all of this and of steam, which is the smell of water heated above its ambient temperature, the smell of energy being applied to something ordinary to produce something necessary. You lie in the water. This is your 20 minutes, and you intend to use all of them. You think about nothing specific. This is not as easy as it sounds. The mind, particularly a mind that spends its days on Latin and French, and the management of children, and the management of expenses, and the management of social position, does not simply stop running because the body has been put in hot water. But you've been practicing this for years. The deliberate not thinking, the choice to simply be in the room, in the water, in the heat. The tub is cast iron and slightly rough at the edges where the enamel has worn. Your elbow finds a smooth section and rests there. Your hair is unpinned, pinned up loosely for the bath, and the steam is finding the edges of it and beginning to make it curl, which is one of the things your hair does when it encounters humidity. Small curls appearing at the hairline, the front edge of control softening into something unplanned. You think about the smell of the room, not with analysis, not the sociological analysis, the 28 layers of meaning, but simply the smell, steam and carbolic, and the faint iron of the geyser. Your own skin, warm. Warm is a smell, not usually categorized as one, but it is. The smell of temperature, the way cold has its own smell. That mineral, slightly sharp quality. Warm has its own quality too, rounder, more alive. The smell of a body that is at ease rather than braced. You wash your hair. This is an additional luxury of Thursday. You've learned to time it so that the hair has a full day's notice of its impending return to presentable. Tomorrow is Friday. By Friday morning, carefully managed, the hair will be dry and will behave. The shampoo preparation is a small amount of liquid. You make it yourself, which is common practice and not an eccentricity, with egg yolk beaten into water and a small amount of the lavender oil, because egg yolk cleans, and the lavender is the antifungal element that keeps the scalp from developing the particular staleness that occurs when hair is washed infrequently in city air. You work it into your hair with your fingers, from scalp to ends, and the smell is the smell of egg and lavender together, which should not be pleasant, and somehow is warm and vegetal and slightly floral. The smell of maintenance rather than adornment. You rinse it under the tap. Cold water. There is no warm rinse here unless you want to use the geyser again. which would require relighting it, which would take time you don't have. Cold water over your hair, and the gasp that comes with it even when you're expecting it. The quick flinch of temperature, and then the scalp tingling and the hair heavy and clean and the smell of it already changing. The egg note dissipating, the lavender emerging more clearly, the clean water smell that is neither of these things but the underlying freshness that both of them together produce. You get out. You dry yourself with the towel that is neither the one Mrs. Penworth provides, thin cotton, elderly, sufficient, nor anything special, but is yours, and dry. You put on your wrapper. You pin your hair up loosely with the pins you brought down. The mirror above the small bathroom shelf shows you a face that is slightly flushed from the hot water, the cheekbones prominent, the eyes clear. Your hair, still damp, is escaping slightly from its pins in the way it always does after washing. You look different from your morning self. The same features but warmer, less managed. Something more like what you actually look like, underneath the 75 brush strokes and the fresh collars and the correct application of lavender water. You look, if you're being honest, rather well. You wrap your wet hair in the extra towel you brought for this purpose, take your things, and go back upstairs. In your room, the fire is warm and steady. You sit in front of it, closer than usual, and let your hair dry in sections, combing through it with your fingers, working out the tangles before they set. The smell of it fills the room, the clean smell, the lavender, the particular freshness of hair that has been thoroughly washed and is now drying in front of a coal fire. It's a good smell. You allow yourself to notice this. You are right now warm and clean and alone in your room, and the smell is yours, and it is good. Friday. Friday is significant for a specific reason that has nothing to do with the schoolroom. Friday afternoon, from 3 to 5 o'clock, Eleanor Marsh attends the Society for the Encouragement of Women's Employment, which is a mouthful of a name for a small room above a printer's shop on Bedford Square where approximately 15 women gather on Friday afternoons to talk about work. The society was founded in 1875 by a woman named Miss Georgiana Harker, who is now 53 and who has the energy of someone half her age and the patience of someone twice it. Its membership is variable. Women come and go as their circumstances change, some dropping out when they marry or move, some coming back, some staying for years. At the moment, the membership includes 3 school teachers, 2 of whom are from the same school in Islington and travel together, a woman who runs a small stationery business on Southampton Row, a woman who does botanical illustration for a natural history press, which is not exactly employment in the standard sense, but which she is adamant about including. 2 nurses from the hospital near King's Cross, a woman who works in the telegraph office, which is one of the newer forms of employment opening to women, the technological newness of the telegraph making it slightly more available than older industries, and various others who come and go, including you. You joined 3 years ago. You found the advertisement in a newspaper, one of the small women's papers, not the fashion ones, the others, the ones that advertise lectures and improvement societies and employment agencies and the various other small infrastructure pieces of the life of the working woman in London. You went to the first meeting with the specific anxiety of someone entering a social space without knowing the social rules, and discovered within approximately 10 minutes that the social rules were approximately bring something to contribute, listen more than you speak, and don't condescend to anyone's means of employment, which means don't say, well, naturally, one would rather, in reference to someone else's work. You have kept these rules well enough that you've been coming for 3 years. Today, Friday, you leave the Haverstock house at 2:45 instead of 5 o'clock. Mrs. Haverstock has a social engagement that means the children are going out with the nursemaid this afternoon, which makes your Friday afternoon attendance possible, which is a monthly occurrence that you're still grateful for each time it happens. You walk to Bedford Square. The afternoon is cold but clear, the particular clear of a March day when the cloud cover is lifted and the light comes down at an angle that almost persuades you it's a different season. The streets are busy with the Friday afternoon energy of the week ending, the small shift in pace that signals the approach of Saturday, which is not exactly rest for most people, but is a different kind of work, the domestic and personal work as opposed to the professional kind. The printer's shop smells when you open the door to go through to the stairs, of ink and paper and the warm mechanical smell of the press itself. Not running at this moment, but the smell of it is permanent, the ink worked into every surface of the room. You go through and up. The room above the printers is not large. It has a long table, a collection of mismatched chairs, a small fireplace that Miss Harker lights a full hour before meetings to ensure the room is warm when people arrive, and a row of books along one wall. Reference books mostly, the kind of things that are useful to women navigating the specific difficulties of 1882 employment. Legal references, employment guides, the collected published speeches of various reformers. Miss Harker is already there, as she always is. The fire lit, the tea prepared on the small side table. She's a tall woman who has never in your experience expressed the slightest concern about her height, her hair, her nose, or any other feature that a smaller woman might have been encouraged to apologize for. She dresses well in a way that is clearly deliberate without being vain. The deliberateness says, I know exactly what I'm doing here, and the not vainness says, and it's not about you. She smells of lavender too, you notice, though in her case it's a more forthright version than yours, not the careful management of lavender water, but something more like lavender sachets in everything she owns, the smell embedded deeply into the fabric of her clothes, the smell of a woman who has been wearing lavender for 30 years and has simply made it hers. Miss Marsh. She looks pleased to see you. She generally looks pleased to see people, which is one of the things that makes the room feel like a reasonable place to spend a Friday afternoon. Miss Harker. Tea is poured. You sit. The others arrive in ones and twos, shaking off the cold, unwinding scarves, taking their usual chairs with the easy habit of regulars. The two nurses from the King's Cross Hospital arrive together. One of them, Nurse Williams, though she always introduces herself as Ellen, sits down next to you. She smells of the hospital. Carbolic, very strongly. The kind of carbolic that comes from industrial quantities rather than a single bar of soap. And underneath that something else, something slightly sweet and slightly sharp, which is the smell of illness adjacent, the smell of being in a room with the sick every day, which is not the smell of sickness itself, but the smell of proximity to it. She wears it with complete unself-consciousness, the way you wear lavender water, as simply the smell of her work. Ellen Williams is 38. She's been nursing since she was 26. She's not married. She's not, as far as you can tell, particularly interested in being married. She's interested in nursing, and in the question of whether nurses should be better paid, and in whether women should be admitted to the Royal College of Physicians, which they currently are not, and in tea, which she drinks in large quantities. You look well, she says to you in the direct manner of someone who makes physical assessments automatically. Better colour than last month. The walk does it, you say, and Thursday bath. Ellen nods, as if Thursday bath is a sufficient explanation for anything. The meeting begins when Miss Harker calls it to order, which she does by saying right then, in a tone that is not quite a shout and does not need to be. The agenda today includes a report from the telegraph office woman. Her name is Miss Grace. She is 26, and she arrived 4 months ago, and has the energy of someone who has recently discovered that other women in her position exist, and finds this genuinely revelatory. On the new regulations regarding female telegraph operators, and whether the rate of pay is comparable to male operators' rates, which she already knows it isn't, but is documenting precisely because precise documentation is the tool. It also includes a discussion about the question of what to do when an employer asks, as some do, for a woman to leave her position upon marriage, a discussion that recurs periodically, because it recurs in their lives periodically, different women each time, and it includes today something Miss Harker raises herself, which is a clipping from the Saturday Review, a well-known periodical, often hostile to women's employment and women's education, and women doing anything that is not the quiet domestic management of a household. And the clipping is from a piece about superfluous women, which is the term the Saturday Review uses for unmarried women of the educated classes, the term suggesting that there are too many of them, that their superfluity is a problem, that the problem has a cause which is probably their own refusal to occupy the correct position. Miss Harker reads a passage aloud. She reads it in the tone of someone presenting evidence. The passage contains the phrase that unmarried women of a certain age have ceased to be properly domestic in their habits, and thereby have lost the natural feminine odour of home and hearth, developing in its place a kind of institutional staleness akin to the smell of libraries and schoolrooms. She puts the paper down. The room is quiet for a moment, with a quality of quiet that comes after something has been said that is both absurd and precise. The smell of libraries, Ellen Williams says, in the tone of someone very carefully maintaining neutrality. And schoolrooms, you say. I spend most of my time in a hospital, Ellen says, which apparently is worse. Institutional staleness, says Miss Grace, the telegraph woman. She's taking notes. She always takes notes. He means that we smell wrong. He means that we smell of work, Miss Harker says. She says this without particular anger. She says it as one would say, here is the diagnosis. Here is what is actually being said under the language being used. The smell of work, which is categorically distinct from the smell of domesticity, which the article considers natural and correct for women. The botanical illustrator, Miss Ford, who has been sitting in the corner with a sketchbook she brings to every meeting and draws in during discussions with the innocent appearance of someone not fully paying attention, who is in fact fully paying attention, says, what does the smell of libraries consist of, chemically speaking? Because I would genuinely like to know. Old paper, someone says. Dust, says someone else. The particular chemistry of paper decomposing slowly over time, Miss Ford says, which is actually rather fascinating. It's a complex mixture of organic compounds. Some of them come from the lignin in the paper, some from the ink, some from the various adhesives in the binding. And he's using that as an insult, Ellen says. He's using the idea of it. The idea that certain smells belong to certain spaces, and certain women in certain spaces smell of those spaces, and that those spaces are not the correct space for women to be in. Miss Harker folds the clipping and puts it in her folder. It's the same argument dressed in different language. Which argument? Miss Grace asks. She really is writing things down. That a woman occupying a professional space is a woman occupying a space that isn't hers, and that this wrongness will express itself physically in how she looks, in how she smells, in some detectable deviation from the correct presentation that marks her as being in the wrong place. A pause. You say, "It's designed to make us self-conscious." Everyone looks at you. That's the function of it, you say, not as information about smell, as a mechanism. If a woman walking into a library or a schoolroom or a hospital or a telegraph office is thinking about whether she smells wrong, whether her presence in this space is detectable as an error, she is using part of her attention on that question that she could be using on the work. It's a tax on attention, and it's levied only on the people who are already being charged more for everything else. A longer pause. That, says Ellen Williams, is extremely well put. "Write it down," Miss Harker tells Miss Grace. Miss Grace writes it down. The meeting continues. The discussion moves from the Saturday Review piece to the practical question of the employment regulations, and you sit in the warm room above the printer's shop and drink your tea and listen to women who smell of carbolic and ink and linseed oil, and lily of the valley and institutional staleness and schoolrooms and chalk dust and the lavender that Miss Harker has been wearing for 30 years, and the room is full of the smell of women who are doing things, and none of it is wrong, none of it is failed. All of it is simply the smell of work being done by people who have decided to do it. At 5 o'clock you put on your coat. You walk back through Bedford Square, through Bloomsbury, north to Gower Street. The evening is settling in, the light thickening, the Friday evening texture of the streets, slightly relaxed, the week done, people moving with a different quality of attention than Thursday or Wednesday. You pass the marmalade on the Friday tray at home because of course you do, and you sit in your chair and you open the notebook. What does the smell of libraries consist of, chemically speaking? You write paper, ink, adhesive, time, the slow decomposition of things that were made to preserve other things, the preservation of words, of thought, of what people worked out and wrote down so it wouldn't disappear. And they want to use this as an insult. The smell of places where knowledge lives, translated into evidence of incorrectness. You write, a tax on attention. You write, we all smell of something. The question is, who gets to decide whether the smell is correct? You close the notebook. Saturday is half day at the Haverstock House. The children have music lessons in the morning from a piano teacher who comes to the house, which means your attendance is not required, and your afternoon is your own from noon. This is the rhythm of the week. The controlled days with the Haverstock children, the Friday meeting, the Saturday half-afternoon of time that is structurally yours. You use it for the things that the week doesn't allow. This Saturday, a longer walk, out along the embankment and back through the Strand, which is an hour at a minimum and which you do at the pace of someone who is looking rather than arriving. The river on a March Saturday afternoon is doing its own thing, the tide pulling south, the water the colour of pewter under the cloud cover, the smell of it reaching the embankment in waves, the particular smell of the Thames, which has improved from what it was 30 years ago but is still unmistakably itself, the smell of a river that carries the entire weight of a city's daily life, the commerce and the waste and the rain and the ships and the particular organic richness of tidal water with too much activity in it. You stop at the parapet and look out. A barge is moving slowly upriver, loaded with what looks like coal, riding low in the water. The bargeman sits at the back with the expression of someone who has been on this river in all its moods for long enough to have stopped having feelings about it, just presence, just the automatic competence of very long practice. You think about the old naval veteran at Greenwich in the reference episode, but this is not that story. You're not that character. You are 34 and standing on the embankment in 1882, looking at the Thames and thinking about something else. You're thinking about what Miss Harker said, occupying a space that isn't hers, and the smell of that space clinging to her as evidence. The old maid smell is the smell of a space that isn't yours. That's what it amounts to. The woman who never married smells of not marriage, which smells of independence, which smells of a professional space, which smells of chalk and carbolic and library paper, and lily of the valley worn sparingly for 20 years because the shop closed. These are the wrong smells. These are the smells of a life constructed without the correct foundations, and the construction smells of the materials it was built from, and the materials are the wrong ones. But here is the thing you keep coming back to, standing on the embankment watching the coal barge go upriver. The space is yours. Not because it was given to you, not because anyone looked at Eleanor Marsh, age 23, and decided to grant her a life outside marriage as a reward for some quality she displayed. The space is yours because you built it, with a letter of reference from Mrs. Fairfax and the 6 months of savings and the first governess position in Bristol and the slow accumulated work of 11 years. You built a space that is yours, and it smells of what you are, and what you are is not wrong. The smell is not the old maid smell. The smell is the smell of a woman who has been somewhere. The smell of a woman who has taught 2 children who are becoming people, and who knows the ablative absolute and the geography of the Rhine Valley, and the ratio of lavender oil to water, and the correct amount of camphor for woolen storage, and what French bread smells like from a ferry crossing to Calais, and the particular quality of the light on the Thames on a March afternoon. The smell of that. You stand on the embankment for another 10 minutes. Then you button your coat and turn and walk home. Sunday, the church bells. You go to the 10 o'clock service at the church on Euston Road, which you choose because it is sufficiently large that you can attend without being noticed as a regular or a newcomer, and because the sermon is generally brief, and because the church smells on a Sunday morning of cold stone and beeswax, and the accumulated breath of several hundred people, and something indefinably old, the smell of a building that has been doing the same thing for a very long time. After church, you walk north through the quieter streets. Sunday London has its own particular quality. The shops shut, the traffic reduced, the particular kind of stillness that is not actual stillness, but the absence of the weekday velocity, everything running at a lower pressure. The air is slightly cleaner on Sundays, slightly. The factories are quieter and the domestic fires are banked lower, and there is just marginally less coal smoke in the air, which means the underlying smell of the city, the stone and the mud and the rain and the river, is slightly more audible. You go to the lending library on Charing Cross Road. It is open on Sundays, which is technically not quite respectable and practically very useful. The librarian, an elderly man with absolutely no interest in the moral implications of Sunday opening, nods when you come in. You go to the section you want, which is the history shelves, and you find the thing you were looking for, which is a volume on the social history of Roman women that you've been meaning to read for 2 months and have now remembered to actually get. You check it out. You walk home. In your rooms, the fire is lit by 11 because Sunday is the exception to the 6:30 rule. Sunday is the day when the fire can go on earlier because it is Sunday and some things should be allowed. You sit with the Roman women and you read. The room warms. Outside, the Sunday bells of every church in a half-mile radius layer over each other, each slightly out of phase with the others, the same thing said in 30 different voices at 30 different pitches. You read about the Vestals, about the women who ran businesses, about the freed women who owned property, about the women whose names appear briefly in legal documents and then disappear, the way most lives disappear, leaving only the edges of themselves in the records of other people, about the women who lived alone, who were categorized and managed and assigned social meanings by a world that needed them to mean something specific, who occupied their positions anyway, who did their work anyway, who smelled of whatever they smelled of and went on. At 2:00, Margaret's letter is still in the drawer. You take it out and write your reply at the desk, with the window on your left letting in the thin March afternoon light. Dear Margaret, you write, thank you for your letter and for the intelligence about the wool merchant from Sheffield, whom I wish all happiness and whom I have decided, in the privacy of my own sitting room, to find genuinely pleasing as a development. You are right that there is no excuse. I accept this verdict completely. The excuse is that I have not yet encountered a wool merchant from anywhere who offers something I don't already have, and I am, contrary to prevailing opinion, not particularly lonely. Comfortable, yes. Slightly cold in the mornings, perpetually engaged in the economics of cold cream, but not lonely, and not, I think, noticeably smelling of failure, whatever the Saturday Review may suggest. You write about the children, about Clara's French dictionary and the labelled cow, about Edith's ablative absolute. You write about the meeting on Friday and Miss Harker, and the clipping from the Saturday Review, and what you said about the tax on attention, because Margaret may find it interesting, and because writing it down again makes it feel more firmly yours. You write, I am reading about Roman women this afternoon. There is considerable literature on the subject of what happened to women who didn't fit the categories their culture provided, which is to say there is a considerable literature on the subject of most women in most periods of history. It is not an uplifting reading exactly, but it is bracing. One finds company in unlikely places. I love you extremely. Write soon. Eleanor, you seal it. You will post it tomorrow. You go back to the Roman women. That evening, before bed, you take the lavender water from the washstand, the new bottle properly mixed, the oil and water and spirits in the right ratio, the scent holding its structure. You open it and hold it under your nose. The smell is alive, green and slightly resinous, and faintly floral. The smell of a plant that has been processed into a preparation but has not lost its essential character. The smell of something deliberately made. You put 2 fingers in the bottle and apply it to your left wrist, the right wrist, the base of your throat. Not for tomorrow. There's no one to perform for tonight. You're going to sleep in 2 hours. You do it for yourself, for the smell of it, which you like, which has come to mean something you value. Not the meaning the world assigns to it, not the managed presentation of the respectable unmarried woman, but the meaning you've made. The smell of lavender at the end of a day, in a warm room, in your room after a Sunday that was yours. The smell of a life that has been lived in. You put the bottle back. You sit in your chair. The fire is lower now, the coal settling into orange. The Roman women are face down on the side table, where you set them before supper, a scrap of paper marking your place. Outside, Gower Street is quiet with Sunday quiet. You close your eyes for a moment and think about the week. Edith's ablative absolute, Clara's French cow, the Thursday bath, Miss Harker reading from the Saturday Review in the tone of someone presenting evidence. Ellen Williams saying that is extremely well put. The coal barge going upriver. The smell of the Thames on a Saturday afternoon. The Roman women in the legal documents. The edges of lives left behind. The lavender water fresh. The scent holding its structure. The fire. The room. The quiet. Monday coming tomorrow. Tuesday after that. The same walk. The same chalk. The same careful management of all the small materials of a life. And something else. Underneath all of it. Which is not triumph and not resignation and not longing and not peace exactly. But something more complex and more honest than any of those things. The knowledge of what you have built. The specific texture of it. The smell of it. Not the old maid smell. Yours. Monday comes anyway, because Monday always comes, even for women who've had revelations on Sunday evening and have named things correctly in the privacy of their own rooms. The city does not pause to acknowledge this. Gower Street still wakes in coal smoke. The pitcher water is still cold. Mrs. Penworth's stairs still smell of damp wool, old frying fat, and 7 separate lives being conducted economically under one roof. You still pin your collar. You still count your coins. You still apply the lavender water with 2 fingers to the wrists and throat. Not because the world has stopped looking, not because Mrs. Haverstock has stopped assessing, not because Margaret has stopped loving you in ways that sometimes bruise, but because the ritual is yours now. That's the difference. The same act can be surrender one year and possession the next. And when you step into the street, when the morning air catches the lavender and coal smoke and the faint clean harshness of carbolic soap at your cuffs, nobody turns, nobody cries out, nobody discovers the hidden failure the century has been so certain must be leaking from you. A milk cart passes. A boy runs with newspapers under his arm. Somewhere behind a polished door, a woman younger than you is being taught how to become acceptable, before she's even discovered what she might have been instead. And you keep walking, not triumphant, not rescued, not transformed into anything more convenient for the story, but present, maintained, alive, smelling finally, not of absence, not of failure, not of a life gone stale on the shelf, simply of yourself. Good night.